What happens when one of America's most polarizing political commentators sits down with one of television's most outspoken panels? What begins as a routine interview quickly spirals into a heated confrontation, filled with sharp exchanges, competing narratives, and rising tensions. Ben Shapiro arrived on the set to discuss his latest book and the current political climate. The atmosphere was already charged as the hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sunny Hostin, prepared to question the conservative commentator. Whoopi opened the discussion. We're joined today by conservative commentator Ben Shapiro. Ben, thanks for being here. Though I have to say, some of your recent comments have raised quite a few eyebrows. Shapiro leaned forward. Well, Whoopi, I appreciate being here. Though I'm curious which specific comments you're referring to, because I have a feeling we're about to discuss statements that have been taken out of context. Joy Behar immediately jumped in. Oh, please, Ben, don't play coy with us. Your entire brand is built on saying inflammatory things and then hiding behind facts and logic when people call you out. That's interesting, Joy, Shapiro replied, because your brand seems to be built on emotional reactions and personal attacks whenever someone challenges your assumptions. But please tell me exactly what I said that was so offensive. The audience murmured as the tension began to rise. Sarah Haynes attempted to redirect the conversation. Maybe we can start somewhere more constructive. Ben, you've spoken extensively about free speech on college campuses. Is there any common ground we can find there? Shapiro shook his head. Sarah, I'd be happy to discuss that, but I think we need to address the larger issue first. This panel has spent years promoting narratives about conservative voices that I believe are fundamentally unfair, and I'm not interested in pretending otherwise just to keep everyone comfortable. Sunny Hostin responded immediately. Narratives? Ben, you've built a career attacking communities, provoking outrage and presenting yourself as some kind of intellectual authority. That's not honest debate. That's provocation. Provocation? Shapiro shot back. That's rich coming from people who have repeatedly pushed claims that later turned out to be highly questionable. The moment someone challenges your worldview, they're suddenly dangerous or irresponsible. The panel erupted. Whoopi raised her voice. Hold on. Are you seriously dismissing legitimate concerns and disagreements simply because you don't agree with them? Absolutely, Shapiro replied. Because what often happens is that disagreement gets reframed as moral failure. Instead of debating facts, people resort to outrage and accusations. Joy's frustration became increasingly visible. Manufactured outrage? You come on this show acting like you're the smartest person in every room, but all you're really doing is selling division. Joy, Shapiro answered calmly. The only person demonstrating hostility right now is you. I came here expecting a conversation. What I'm getting instead is a series of personal attacks. Alyssa Farah Griffin tried to restore order. Can we all take this down a notch? We're supposed to be having a discussion, not a shouting match. Alyssa, I appreciate that, Shapiro said. But let's be honest about what's happening. This interview feels less like a discussion and more like an attempt to score political points by putting a conservative guest on the defensive. The accusation landed heavily. Whoopi stared back. That's a pretty bold claim. We invited you here and gave you a platform. A platform? Shapiro laughed. From the moment I sat down, I've been defending myself from character attacks instead of discussing ideas. That's not a platform. That's an ambush. The audience reacted. With a mix of applause and boozes, producers struggled to maintain control of the room. Sunny leaned forward. You want to talk about ideas, Ben? Fine, let's talk about your views on transgender issues. Let's talk about statements you've made that many people consider harmful and offensive. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone realized the discussion was about to enter even more contentious territory. What had started as a promotional interview had now transformed into a direct ideological confrontation, with neither side showing any signs of backing down. Let's talk about your views on transgender issues, Sunny said. Let's talk about your idea that women who pursue careers are somehow betraying their natural role. These aren't intellectual positions. They're harmful talking points designed to appeal to the worst instincts of your audience. Shapiro's expression hardened. Sunny, if you're going to quote me, at least quote me accurately. I've never said transgender people are mentally ill. I've said that gender dysphoria is a psychological condition that deserves compassionate treatment rather than political exploitation. And I've never argued that women shouldn't have careers. I've said that data often shows strong family structures can benefit children, but apparently nuance isn't welcome here. Nuance? Joy exclaimed. You call spreading stereotypes nuance? You're just dressing prejudice up in academic language. The discussion rapidly escalated. Voices rose. Interruptions became constant. What had begun as a political disagreement was becoming increasingly personal. Backstage, producers reportedly signaled for a commercial break. But the conversation continued. Shapiro leaned back in his chair. You know what? This is exactly why people are turning away from shows like this. Instead of engaging with ideas, you rely on emotional arguments and personal attacks. The comment landed heavily. Whoopi's patience appeared to run out. Personal attacks? You come on our show and insult everyone at this table. Who do you think you are? I think I'm someone who values facts over emotions, Shapiro replied. Unfortunately, that seems to be a foreign concept here. You've built careers around narratives and outrage. And when someone challenges them, you react exactly like this. Joy shook her head. Facts over feelings? Your entire political strategy depends on fear and division. You're not some great intellectual. You're a provocateur who has convinced people otherwise. The only fear-mongering happening here is coming from this panel. Shapiro answered. For years you've told audiences that anyone who disagrees with you is dangerous. And now you're lecturing me about division. The audience reaction became increasingly loud, with applause and boos competing across the studio. Sonny leaned forward. You want to talk about dangerous ideas? Let's talk about the people who use your arguments to justify extremism. You may dress your views up in polished language, but many people believe your rhetoric gives cover to some very ugly movements. The accusation immediately changed the tone. For a brief moment, Shapiro appeared stunned. Then he responded, That is one of the most offensive accusations I've ever heard directed at me. To suggest that I support extremists simply because I disagree with your politics says far more about your approach than it does about mine. Sarah Haynes finally joined in more forcefully. How dare you call this panel dishonest? We've been doing this job for years. Shapiro laughed. Sarah, alternative. Media exists because audiences are looking elsewhere for conversations they feel they're not getting from traditional television. Maybe that's worth thinking about. The remark triggered another wave of reactions. Alyssa Farah-Griffin attempted to redirect the discussion. This is getting completely out of hand. Can we please get back to discussing actual issues instead of attacking each other? Shapiro turned toward her. Alyssa, meaningful discussion requires mutual respect. Once people start calling you names, questioning your motives, and assigning the worst possible interpretation to everything you say, productive conversation becomes nearly impossible. Joy immediately responded, Maybe that's because some ideas don't deserve respect. When you spend years attacking people and communities, you don't get to demand civility whenever someone pushes back. Shapiro nodded slowly. There it is. That's the problem. The belief that people who disagree with you aren't simply wrong. They're morally illegitimate. Once you reach that conclusion, conversation ends and condemnation begins. The studio fell quiet for a moment as both sides stared across the table, neither willing to back down. The mask finally comes off, Shapiro said. You don't believe in free speech. You don't believe in dialogue. You don't believe in open debate. You believe that anyone who disagrees with you should be silenced. Thank you for proving my point. The accusation sent shockwaves through the studio. Whoopi rose from her chair, visibly furious. You sanctimonious little weasel, she snapped. You come on this show, insult everyone at this table, and then lecture us about democracy and free speech? Hate and hostility are all I'm seeing from this panel. Shapiro shot back, standing as well. Every time someone challenges your worldview, you resort to insults instead of arguments. The audience erupted into competing cheers and boos. Production assistants moved quickly around the set, attempting to restore order as the discussion spiraled further out of control. Sonny leaned forward, her voice shaking with emotion. You know what's really pathetic? Building a career by targeting people who can't fight back and turning outrage into a business model. For the first time, Shapiro's normally controlled demeanor appeared to crack. A coward, he replied. I'm sitting here facing criticism from an entire panel and defending my views directly. If anyone is avoiding honest debate, it's the people who invited me here only to attack me. Joy immediately jumped back in. Honest debate? There's nothing honest about spreading division and controversy for profit. And there's nothing honest about pretending to be an objective journalist while pushing your own political agenda, Shapiro replied. The exchange became increasingly personal. Joy fired back immediately. How dare you? Before she could continue, Whoopi raised her voice over the chaos. Enough! The studio briefly fell silent. You think you can come onto this set and disrespect everyone here? She demanded. Shapiro folded his arms. This is supposed to be a place for discussion, not an echo chamber where everyone agrees with each other. The moment someone disagrees, they're treated like an enemy. Sunny stood as well. You're the one turning every disagreement into a personal attack, and you're turning every disagreement into a moral indictment. Shapiro answered. Anyone who challenges your perspective is immediately labeled dangerous or hateful. Joy shook her head. You call what you do courage? Sitting behind a microphone, attacking people and stirring outrage? I'm honest about my opinions, Shapiro replied. Can everyone at this table say the same thing? The tension continued to build. Sarah Haynes finally stepped in. This is ridiculous. We're supposed to be having a conversation, not shouting at each other on national television. For a moment it seemed the confrontation might finally cool down. Instead, Shapiro turned toward the panel. Adults don't invite someone onto a program just to spend the entire segment attacking them. Adults engage with ideas instead of turning everything into a spectacle. We're a spectacle? Alyssa asked, standing up as well. Look around. You're the one escalating every disagreement. The audience watched in stunned silence as the confrontation reached another boiling point. Look at yourself, Alyssa continued. You're so focused on winning an argument that you've forgotten how to have a conversation. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The studio, once filled with shouting, fell into an uneasy silence as both sides stared across the table, neither willing to back down. The suggestion that he was making a fool of himself appeared to strike a nerve. Shapiro's face flushed red. His hands trembled slightly, and his usually controlled delivery became noticeably sharper. Challenged? He shot back. This isn't a challenge. This is harassment. This is what happens when people run out of arguments and replace substance with volume and personal attacks. The remark immediately intensified the atmosphere. The audience erupted into competing cheers and boos. Some people applauded, others shouted in protest, and the studio's carefully managed environment seemed to unravel. Security personnel moved closer to the stage as producers scrambled behind the scenes to regain control. Whoopi made one final attempt to end the confrontation. You know what, Ben? We're done. This interview is over. Shapiro laughed, though there was an edge of frustration beneath it. Done? Fine. Because this has been one of the least productive conversations I've ever been part of. Sunny shook her head. The only unproductive thing here is pretending you're some fearless truth-teller when you're really just a provocateur who profits from controversy. Shapiro immediately fired back. Provocateur? You people have turned politics into entertainment. Every disagreement becomes outrage. Every debate becomes a performance. The argument had moved far beyond its original topic. Joy leaned forward. At least we don't pretend division is intellectual courage. The comment landed hard. For a brief moment, Shapiro seemed genuinely stunned. Then he responded quietly. You don't know anything about me, my beliefs, or my motivations. Yet you've spent this entire interview assigning the worst possible intentions to everything I say. The studio descended further into chaos. Producers shouted instructions through headsets. Audience members argued among themselves. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of the increasingly volatile exchange. Finally, Shapiro stood. The movement instantly drew everyone's attention. He looked directly toward the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what political discussion has become. Personal attacks, outrage, and tribal loyalty replacing actual debate. The moment someone challenges the accepted narrative, they're treated as an enemy rather than a participant in a conversation. His remarks only fueled the tension. Whoopi pointed toward the exit. Then maybe it's time for this conversation to end. Shapiro nodded. Perhaps it is. As he removed his microphone, he continued, I came here expecting a discussion. Instead, I found a room full of people more interested in scoring points than exchanging ideas. If that's where public discourse is headed, then we have bigger problems than any political disagreement. The host responded immediately, objecting to his characterization of the interview. But the segment was effectively over. Shapiro placed the microphone on the table and turned toward the exit. The audience remained divided, some applauding, others booing. Production staff rushed to prepare for a commercial break, while the host continued discussing what had just happened. As Shapiro disappeared backstage, the cameras briefly captured the aftermath. Frustrated panelists, a stunned audience, and a studio still buzzing from the confrontation. What had begun as a routine interview had transformed into a spectacle that would inevitably dominate online commentary and political debate. When the program finally cut away, the atmosphere remained tense. Regardless of where viewers stood politically, one thing was clear. The conversation had long since stopped being about ideas and had become a clash of personalities, emotions, and competing narratives, and that perhaps was the most revealing part of all.